Hi, this is Paul Price, CEO and founder of ISA. I want to welcome everybody to our webinar today. The ISA ongoing webinar series includes enterprise architecture, technology architecture topics that to help you follow best practices in your architect initiatives. We're thrilled to have both K2 and Wells Fargo supporting today's program. We have the K2 platform, BPM solution that brings applications that streamline work, save money, and reduce risk. We're happy to have K2 as a sponsor for today and at the ISA World Summit. Jason Trent will be speaking for K2 today. Hi, Jason.
Hi, thanks very much. Glad to be here.
Yeah, thanks so much. The ISA webinar series, we run 3 to 4 webinars per month to bring strategic guidance and real-life best practice. We've got Matt Kinser from Wells Fargo today talking about their experience in implementing BPM solutions inside of Wells Fargo and how that's rolling out for them. Matt has worked with workflow and BPM solutions for over 12 years. He currently serves as the BPM Solutions Consultant with Wells Fargo and is responsible for solution design and consulting with business partners and shaping the organization's BPM strategy, including current and future portfolio work. We're really thrilled to be talking about this topic, BPM and business process management and automation continue to be a backbone of architecture capability, innovation, and integration into strategic work with business partners. The BPM solutions expose opportunities for localized innovation, for true value generation from both your architecture as well as your general IS and IT teams. So we're really happy to be talking about BPM today, and I've been very excited about this solution in specific. K2 is one of the larger and more capable providers of BPM solutions. They help to automate and manage business processes with document approval and inventory tracking, as well as to bringing together those processes with people, service components, and information and systems into an application whole to drive business solutions. That what's been built can be used like building blocks and assembled, but also then tied in with people workflows, which is a very exciting and powerful solution for those of you who have not begun to use automated BPM solutions. These also fit in with the mobility, BYOD, cloud computing kinds of directions that most architect organizations are evaluating in terms of investment by bringing service portfolios together and being able to dynamically tie those into new workflows, including in a partnership with your business units. The tool's easy to use and very powerful in that way. I myself have worked on BPM solutions with customers and partners inside of my own organizations and have found that architectures that include our business partners or our customers directly in the development process fundamentally change the relationship between technologists and other business practitioners, business people, in such a way that they are exposed to the opportunities for innovation, as well as potentially some of the lack of business process optimization that often exists in without these kinds of solutions. So I've been very excited today to have both K2 and Wells Fargo in to talk about how this works in real life. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jason to talk for just a moment. And Jason, are you there?
I am, yes. Thanks very much, Paul.
Thanks again. I'm looking forward to hearing the solution today.
Yeah, thanks very much. Well, everyone on the call, thanks very much for joining us. As Paul mentioned, K2 is very happy and excited to be presenting here today, and again, also in Austin here in a couple weeks down at the other event in December. I think what we're going to do is actually start off today with Matt Kinser from Wells Fargo, and allow Matt to share a little bit of the time of the call today to talk about some of the work that he's done at Wells, and then I'll take it over from there and talk about some best practices that K2 as a technology BPM platform have seen and have actually helped share with our customers. Matt?
Well, thank you very much, Paul and Jason, for the introduction. And I want to also thank you for the opportunity, ISA and K2, to be here and speaking with you today. And of course, thank you to everybody that's called in and taken some of your time to participate in this call. As Paul mentioned in his introduction, I have been working with workflow technologies for over 12 years now. And my decision to get into workflow technologies was something I did intentionally. I was doing server-side development on some projects with workflow engines. I became very interested in the engine itself. And these days I work with a competency center here at Wells Fargo. And the name of our group is Workflow and Imaging Technologies. Now, for those of you all who kind of follow the industry, you probably recognize that it's not BPM and ECM technologies. The group itself formed in the mid-90s. So that was before BPM was an industry concept or standard that people would talk about, and how you have a whole suite of solutions that can really bring out that best in practice work management. Today we are going to talk about our methodology that we've developed over the years, and it's really, a lot of it's developed as a result of issues we've had and mistakes we've made along the way. But before I get into that, I want to touch on some of the work we do and how we do it. First off, we always partner with different BPM vendors, and we've been doing this for 17 years. The last 4+ years, we've been partnering very closely with K2. And we look for a couple things in a partner. First off, we look for a business partner or vendor partner who can bring in a technology stack that has a robust set of capabilities that we need. So that's all the, all the merging, branching, escalations, expirations, the different patterns and constructs you can need in a BPM engine. And primarily, we want someone else to bring that in because that's not our business mission. Our mission is to bring value to customers. And we could spend a year building a workflow engine. I know we could. And we've spent enough time in them that we know the different components. I don't think it would be easy, but we could do it. We've got enough knowledge there. But we're not going to do in a year's worth of development what K2 is bringing to the table. So we partner with a vendor such as K2. We also look for something else from that vendor, and we look for a relationship that we can build. I don't care what technology you use, you're going to have issues from time to time. You need a company that you can work with. In addition to that, as we grow, as we look at new constructs that we need to implement, we need someone that we can partner with. So that's been our mantra. As I mentioned, we have been working with them for over 4 years now. In addition to that, we split out the workflow from our solution. We abstract it out. And I think Paul kind of referenced this in his introduction. The abstracting out of a workflow process really should be a standard concept that anybody considers when they're looking at a process implementation. We abstract out data, we abstract out security, we abstract out business rules, UI, everything else. Process is no different. And a lot of times where we see issues where people try and embed that process logic somewhere in their business logic layer and their UIs and everywhere else. And that's not the right way to go about really developing a process-centric solution. So today I am going to go through our methodology, and our methodology really focuses on most of our methodology focuses on taking a business partner from, yes, I need to implement a process solution, to get them to the point that we can actually code that solution. That's where we're going to really be our sweet spot today, because pulling out that process and abstracting out is something that takes some experience and some knowledge to do. It's not your standard project engagement. So we will go through that. Jump into the agenda. We will talk about the roles and methodologies. We're going to talk about our lessons learned. As I've mentioned, we've cut our teeth on this stuff. We've made some mistakes. We've done things incorrectly, and that's really driven our methodology. Methodology is not something we just came up with in a room one day. It's something we continue to evolve. We're going to talk about what value we add as a competency center to the organization and some of the implementations that we've done. I'm going to go over the last 3 implementations we've done, and it's basically since, I think, beginning of the summer, so the last 5 to 6 months. As I mentioned, we have had issues. The methodology is growing and developing. We also change it. We host a lot of workflow environments and solutions for customers and specific purposes. So the methodology could change. We have our base things that we're always going to do, but based on the solution we're working with, our methodology will always evolve. We changed it recently in bringing a certain role in earlier on engagements where we knew we were going to take them to solution. in 2 years, we're going to come across something else, or maybe even sooner than that, where we tweak it some more. I want to touch on the roles that really drive out our process. First off, we have the process engineer, and they are, as you see, the basis of this pyramid, and that's because they're kind of our entryway into a process implementation. Our process engineers go out and they work with the business process fulfillers, or the SMEs, and the business leadership. And what they do is they figure out how they want their process to run and what their goals are in looking for a process-centric implementation. Then they become a SME for a solution consultant, and that's my role in the organization. And I work with them, and I also work with the process SMEs and the leadership to figure out what it is we need to implement for that customer. And then we go to the workflow developer and actually create a workflow, technical design basically for the workflow, taking into account all the different constructs and things that would actually have to be coded to implement a workflow. And the workflow developer basically relies on me as a SME and then works with the development team and testers to actually code. You know, and our workflow developers are a key part of this. Everybody's a key part of it. And we'll talk about that some later, but they're not going to be my focus today. In the past, we've called a workflow developer a product specialist because they have to know how to do everything inside of K2. They need to know how to get a UI to integrate with K2. They need to know how to integrate with another system, how to make sure that K2 does the right expirations and merges. Any of those constructs that K2 has, they need to know. As important they are, because we cannot go live without them doing their job and doing it correctly, we spend a lot of time on the work that it takes to get to that point. So a lot of our methodology is actually focused on how do you take a line of business from I want an application that has some processing in it to really what is that process-centric view. And that's where the process engineer and the solution consultant spend a lot of time up front. And we also have a challenge being a competency center is that we don't work with one line of business. So we're not implementing one workflow environment for a new account opener or something along those lines, and then we just continue to build it and improve it. We actually work with all these different groups, and every group we go into, we have to spend a lot of upfront time trying to make sure that they know what we're doing and they understand where we're taking them. Next, for our methodology from a high level, our process engineer goes out and they do a current state business process and they document it. We review that with the business, and once they sign off, then we go and we do a future state business process design. We'll talk about these in more detail. Once we get that signed off, that's when we actually do the workflow process design. What is the current state business process? Well, this is where a process engineer, and this is a very important word for us, discovers what the business process is. And that's because, especially when you have a large or complex business process, no one person really knows exactly what occurs at every step in that process. You may have 10 different teams that interact in the process, and they know what they do. You may have leadership who knows from a high level what's going on, but you generally don't have one person who can tell you every specific thing and every detail of the process. So they really are doing discovery, and you find out things too. If you have a system that for some reason 50% of the time the post fails at night, so you have resources that come in every morning and they look for the failed post and they rerun them, guess what? Like it or not, that's part of your process. Those are parts of the warts and everything else that define your entire process. So the process engineer goes out and they discover the business process and they document it in a diagram. We go left to right. We do a BPM in for our standard notation. We also color code tasks based on role. But we do a diagram of that process because we found it's the easiest way to communicate this to different levels of people. We can discuss the entire process from end to end. We can drill into one specific area and really drive it out, the transitions and who all's involved and what their exit conditions are. So this is the way that we've determined through time is the best way to communicate it. Swim lanes, for example, we don't use swim lanes because when you get a complex process, you have a lot of crossing of lines to get back to the appropriate swim lane every time you need to get it back to a specific role. And see, here the engagement could end. And it could end for different reasons. We could have the scope of our engagements. We're just going to go out and we're going to do process discovery, and that's it. We could also go out there and we start working with them. We find out that, you know what, they have an idea of what they do, but they're not very mature in their process, and they can take this and they can follow it, and they can run it for a while to see what their realities are, and then they come back to us when they can better represent their process, and we can work with them. Or we could be engaging with them. An example we had recently, we had 3 different groups that were merging together, and they really thought that they had 3 different processes. They had different UI, they had different data, but once we did our current state business process for all 3 and put them down next to each other, we found out they really do the same process. They need to get what data they think is required in line. They have some other things like that, but they don't need to re-engineer all 3 processes. They had the same process. Once we do the current state, we do a future state business process if that's part of the engagement. That's the process engineer and the solution consultant define how to re-engineer the process. So this first off requires, from our perspective, a signed off current state business process. We need to know, and we need everybody to know how their business runs before we start changing it, because we need to make sure we've got everything. You can't omit things from your future state design and then think it's going to be okay if you get to implementation or automation. It's not going to work. We have to understand their business drivers. Business drivers, you've got your cost savings. You could have an increase of traffic and no increased resources. You could have audit things you have to worry about. There's a whole slew of business drivers that could be out there, but we need to know what it is we're redesigning for. In addition to that, we're going to look at best practices. There are some simple things, and a lot of different methodologies call out the same thing, but is get rid of false starts. So let's make sure that we're asking the requester data that they know. We're not asking them our domain knowledge inside the fulfillment process, but what do you know that you want me to do? Make sure we get the required data. As much data as we can get automated in there from drop-down boxes or radio buttons, then we can start handing over transition control to the workflow engine, which removes some of that manual intervention. In addition to that, just another basic one is if you can get your approvals earlier in the process, you have less risk of somebody working on something that's going to get canceled. So there's some best practices and different things we've seen through the years that we will try to apply to a process. Some of them may work, some may not. But we're going to go through and we go through those different options. And again, an engagement could end here. The engagement could have been scoped to be a future state business process only. It could be that they want to actually do an implementation, but they don't have the funding to take it further to pay for the developers and the license and all that kind of stuff. But if we do end here, we will give them the documentation. They may just want to run this process manually for a while before they implement. So there are a lot of different scenarios. But if they do want to move forward, we do another level of process design. And that's the workflow process model. And that's where I come in and I actually design a model for the workflow developer. And there are a couple significant differences between this and the business process. When you're actually executing a model in an engine, you're only going to put the steps in there that you want to execute. You could have a 100-step process, and that some of them are going to stay manual. Some of them are fulfilled in another system that exists today. So those won't be part of your workflow process. Instead, it's really only the steps, the portions of the process that you want to implement. And then you have to layer on top of that all the different workflow constructs. So you have the idea of it could be a tightly pre-scripted process, or it could be a case implementation, a dynamic case management, or ad hoc tasks being generated, subtasks. You have SLAs, milestones, how people are going to report on the process, escalations, expirations, all the different transitions, everything that can happen. That has to be in here. And what we end up with is a technical design for our development resource, our workflow developer. I want to go through some of our lessons learned. And these are just some of my favorites because they're ones that we encounter all the time. And we'll go through each of them, and some of them you may be able to tell from me that they're bigger pain points than others. But the first one is we have to get people to a process-centric approach. As I mentioned, we work with all these different groups, and we'll talk about some of the processes that we actually work on. But we work with all these different groups in the company, and each one of them generally has an application-centric design or a process-centric design, but not a process automation, understanding how to get there. So we have to take them from their typical, I need an application, I got a database, I got business logic, I got UI. And you know what? Here's the data for my UI, and that's what the requester puts in. We have to kind of break that mold, and we have to spin it around, and we have to get them to start with the process. And once we actually know the process, we can build the solution around it. And my terminology here, for me, is very important because we're no longer building necessarily an application. We're building a solution. And the solution takes into account each of these boxes. each of the roles, the types of users in here, and how to most effectively give them their work. You could have a manager review, and you want the managers to actually approve tasks in their smartphone. You could be working in a warehouse situation where you have people who need to work from a tablet. You also may have what you would call a hub application or that center application that has your reports and metrics and your task list for a lot of people who log in, day in, day out. You could have that too, but you could have another fulfillment group later in the process who actually has their own landing zone that they go into every day for everything that they need. Well, it's probably most effective to drop a task list into their tool and find a way to render the UIs for them where they go to work every day. That way they're not jumping in between 2, 3 systems trying to figure out what's going on. So it's no longer, let's build an application. Let's provide a solution that effectively addresses this process and the different people that work within this process. The second thing is we have to partner with the business. And we'll talk about this some more later and how it really comes to play in one of the projects we did recently. But we need everyone to bring their expertise to the table and represent their expertise. We need those fulfillment SMEs. And you have a process that spans 10 teams. We need people from each of those 10 teams representing what they do. We need business leadership to represent their goals and their visions. And then we need to come in and we need to represent the process. And if we can get all 3 of those roles working together and having an open dialogue, we are very successful in understanding what the current state process is and what the future state process should be, what constructs we need to adhere to. We start getting a little sideways when the business leadership wants to tell us how the fulfillers do their work every day. Fact of the matter is, they're not in the trenches. They have the best intentions. But when they're sitting there saying, oh yeah, they just do this and this is how they do it, they're usually missing a lot of detail. Same thing, if we go in there and we start telling the leadership how they need to run their business, we can give them suggestions. We can tell scenarios to them when they say they want something. We can tell them the ramifications of what that means, but we don't need to tell them how to do their job. We just need to make sure they understand what their options are and that they're driving through our methodology. The SMEs, we don't need them telling us how to do a process design. They may be great at process. A lot of people, our process is something very common, but process implementation automation takes another level of data and detail, and that's what we have to drive to. So it's really important that everybody wears their own hat, and when we do, we end up in a very good place. There's a leap of faith here, and as you got to trust the methodology. Really think of this as a methodology to be successful in BPM implementations. But it's a new journey. When somebody comes in and they say, I have a new application I want you to build, and we realize it's process-centric, we're going to start with the process. And they want to talk data elements. They want to talk functionality. But we're really interested up front in understanding that process. In order for them to make that leap, one of the things we have to do is demonstrate value. And we have little wins along the way, but our biggest opportunity to demonstrate value is when we're doing that current state business process review. And we sit there with some complex process that spans all these different teams and different leaders, and they all get it. And they understand. And when we go into a specific area or sub-process of the process and we start saying, this is how you do your work, these are the steps you take, these are the exit conditions and transitions, and everyone's sitting there nodding their head and they're going, yep, you got it, you're right. That's generally when we can show our first huge value level that we bring to the project. And then both teams have to share a vision. So if they're talking automation, implementation is their final goal, we have to be talking that same language. Of course, we're going to get there through steps in the process, but we need to know where we're all going. Therefore, they're going to have more faith. And I do use the we and they or the us and them in this slide. And I hate to use that in general, but this really is, you've got to come to us with how we want to do this, and we've got to reach out to you so you're comfortable doing it. And it can be a very difficult thing with a group that kind of has their own mindset on how they want to do these projects. Next, and this is one of the things that I spend a lot of my time doing, and that's closing the development gap. During the whole process discovery, process redesign, and future state design, solution design, we're going to talk about what are the impacts of their decisions. If you say a requester does this, or you say you want your fulfiller to do that, what does that mean from a process-centric view? What are the different roles in the buckets? It is a big part of our design. We get to the end of the design and everybody gets it and they're excited, and then we go away and we start developing. And the longer we develop, the more time they have to lose all the memory of the conversation we have. And that's no knock on them. It happens with anything in any area. If you hear something once and you take it away, you're not necessarily going to remember it all. So we end up in the UAT where we're trying to re-educate. So closing that development gap and using tools to get development out quicker is really important to us. So our value add is that we understand business process and automating the business and automating process solutions. And this is important because we have PMs, we have development leads, we have developers, BAs, everybody. Every other development team in the bank does. The difference is our team understands process. So when you have someone who's developing a task or someone getting requirements for a task, they understand what that means in the bigger picture of the process and how it fits together. And that really is what makes us unique from other development teams in the bank. I'm going to go through 3 recent engagements, and I'm going to talk about the process and what value we added. So the first one is we did a future state process design for adding statements to a customer. You would not believe how difficult it is to get a statement or a message onto a customer statement. You have to figure out if it's targeting the right statements. Is it checking 101 and 102? Is it Spanish? It has to go through legal and compliance, all these different groups for approval. So we worked with them. In this one of those situations, we got everyone in the room. They dedicated 2 days of their annual week together with us, 2 levels of leadership, everybody sharing their perspective. And we came up with a approach that addressed their needs. We're about the 5th team that's tried to do this, inside the bank and outside the bank. We have not implemented their solution because of funding, but they do have our future state design. They're very excited about it. And the reason is because we recognize that it was a case pattern. People keep trying to put them in a pre-scripted process where step A goes to step B goes to step C. That's not really what they had. And because we understood the technology and the different constructs, once we started hearing things, they were setting up red flags, and we just designed. They're very excited, something they want to implement. But our value there was just our experience knowing what we could do in BPM. The second engagement is we have a lot of sensitive information in the bank. We're dealing with HR in this, and people have a need to know to get that information. We have to make sure that it gets the appropriate approvals before that information goes out. So we worked with this group to implement their process. And I will be the first to tell you we introduced some issues. They had 3 different roles that were kind of changing back and forth, 3 different people. They weren't always there, so we weren't eating our own dog food, to say. We weren't following our methodology here. And we're the ones responsible. We knew the issue we were getting into. We thought it was a simple process that we kind of get through it. We made a mistake. So what happened was we ignored the methodology. We implemented something. We gave them 80% of what they needed. They're happy about it. They've got some changes, but they also want to work with us on future engagements. And we talked about the fact that we can't do this again and be successful. So it's very important, and for so many different reasons, you have different things that want to get you off the methodology, whether it's politics, not entirely knowing the roles, or thinking that we have something small enough that we can kind of skirt around. The third engagement, and this is a really neat one, is we have a lot of URLs that the company blocks, as you can imagine. And when you get to this URL, a URL that's blocked, you get a black screen that says access denied, and you can request access. And there are a lot of different reasons. I may need to get access to a blog associated with K2. Now, they block blogs because generally blogs aren't as important from what a bank does. So I may need an actual exception to that. So this whole process is about managing that exception, getting the approvals. They have 12,000 requests a year, and they're about to up to 24,000 requests with no additional resources. They spend all their time working on this. So we redesigned the model, and by understanding the different roles that participated in the workflow solution, the capabilities of what we could hand over to the engine, we were able, by partnering with them, to design a solution that's going to route over half of their total volume, whether it's 24,000, 12,000, 36,000. Over half of those will never have to go to the fulfillment team. And integration will all be automated now. So now they can handle that 2 times load increase, or that 100% load increase, and more, because we could work with them to figure out what they needed, what we needed to provide to the requester to actually automate that portion of the process that could be automated. So I'm going to wrap up here. I do have a couple things I just want to share in my final thoughts. What I think is key to implementing BPM solution is experience. And for us, it's not experience that we just had. This experience that we developed. As I mentioned before, we made mistakes, and we learned from them. I've worked with a lot of different well-meaning architects and solution engineers who come and they say, okay, no, I know how to do this. We put in the business rules. We can make a process run. And they get into issues. And it's because they haven't had that different experience. They haven't seen this type of a project before. I'm taking nothing away from their overall acumen, how good they really are. So if you are looking to get into a BPM implementation and you haven't done it before, you've got two choices. You can either take it on yourself and know that you are going to have some failures and shortcomings up front. I know we did. Anyone I think who's done it before from scratch will tell you that's the case. Or you can partner with somebody who can bring that experience and get you ramped up quicker. Thank you very much for your time today. I've enjoyed the opportunity to speak to you. I would now like to hand it over to Jason Trent with K2, and he's going to continue on with the presentation.
Great, Matt. Thanks very, very much. I appreciate a lot of great insight there, a lot of great information, especially for folks that maybe haven't done this before. Let me give me just 1 second to switch over, and you guys should see my screen here in a second. All right, great. Good deal. That should be up and running now. So fantastic. So again, my name is Jason Trent. I am a solutions architect for K2. And as Paul from ISA was so good to mention initially, K2 is a business process management, and what we'd like to consider ourselves actually is a process application development platform that allows companies to come in and really take a look at their business processes, provide fantastic tooling around ways to go in and model those processes. And then we have an amazing process engine that allows the ability to go and execute those processes, as well as building really rich and engaging UIs on top of those, and then garnering all the metrics and all the really reporting stuff and details around the processes and the line of business data that you integrate with into a solution. I'm not going to really spend a lot of time talking about what K2 is, though, today. Really what I wanted to cover today and share with you in the time we have remaining is really these three different things. Talking about what is and what K2 looks at least as a components of a process-driven application. And I think you heard a lot of that in Matt's talk today. He did a great job of really outlining the different components of what he sees whenever they're building solutions within Wells, and largely that's not very different than actually the way that K2 looks at it, coincidentally enough. Next, transitioning there and really taking a look at what we consider the process-driven project approach. And we'll talk about some of the best practices that we found working with customers and partners like Wells whenever building out solutions on top of BPM platform, and how that compares to maybe traditional project approaches that a lot of you have done previously. And then lastly, we're going to talk about BPM Centers of Excellence. And that might be a new term for some of you. We'll take some time to really lay out what that is and some examples of the benefits whenever you want to go and start looking at really turning the corner of building these process-driven application solutions. We'll talk about some strategies around that here at the end. So really, what makes up the components of a process-driven application? What are the really things that we see, at least, whenever talking with partners and customers around these types of solutions? And really, it's not that different than probably what most of you think of for a lot of the different solutions that you build. And that was echoed in a lot of what Matt had to say earlier. I mean, you still need to have a way to go and present some kind of UI or form on top of that. You still have data that you need to go and pull in from various different systems that exist across the enterprise. It's not always just data in a particular transactional database. Sometimes it's a CRM system. Sometimes it's a document management system. At the core of every BPM solution and process are really going to be the people that are involved in that. And so what are the roles that those people play within an organization? Do you need to factor in their workload? Do you need to factor in if they're in the office or out of the office? All kinds of different things around that. The policies that you need to build into your processes. So what are the business SLAs that you need to implement within your process? If a task gets assigned to a group of users and they don't complete it within a certain amount of time, what happens then? Or if you need to go and build business rules into those processes, how are those rules constructed, and where does where does that data live, and how is that managed and changed over time? There's going to be actions that everyone is going to participate in. So whenever a task is assigned to a user or they have to go and fill out a form, there's going to be actions that are presented to them. And how are you going to how are you going to model those actions, and how are you going to surface those actions up to users? With BPM platforms, every time you're building processes, you're attempting to go and automate really a work stream. And you're hoping at the end of the day that you save time and gain efficiencies. And one of the ways that you do both those things is by collecting a ton of metrics around the processes themselves. Because simply building a process and deploying it doesn't, outside of the intrinsic self itself, doesn't provide a ton of additional value unless you start really peeling back the covers and starting to understand, based upon this version of the process, it took this long to complete, but if I make a small change here and there, then we'll see and gain some efficiencies around that. And that really was echoed in a lot, I think, of what Matt was talking about whenever he was going through discovery phases with his customers and his partners internally within the bank and trying to understand their processes. What we've seen a lot as well is that sometimes those processes aren't always the best the first time you build them, but by using advanced BPM tools, you can really take a better look at those and understand your processes. So after you think about all these different components of a process-driven project, then you got to think about, well, how do I actually go and build something like that? Now, Matt was great to share some of his insight into how they build their projects at Wells, and I'm sure that everybody here on the call today has a rich history of building different solutions. But I wanted to take you into a view that we have whenever working with our customers around some of these different best practices and these different customer examples and experiences around building projects like this. So to us, whenever we look at these process-driven projects, these are the different phases that we see. And honestly, whenever you're looking at something like this, most of you will say, well, that's kind of what we're already doing today, right? We already build our projects in this type of approach, by and large. And I think you're right. I mean, I think that you'll see a lot of the exact same steps or stages or whatever it is you want to call those different portions of the phases. You'll see those in traditional project development today. You'll have an envisioning phase where you need to go through, and as Matt mentioned, it's great if you can get 2 days of your business's time to really go in and define exactly what it is that they have today, what their future state is, and how they expect this process to really run. And you bring a ton of wealth and experience, hopefully, with you to the table around the output of what these process-driven applications can be. And then there'll be a time period where you need to go and stand up all the infrastructure, get software installed and data connections sorted out and all kinds of different stuff like that to make sure that the footprint and the infrastructure you're putting in place for this particular solution is going to scale well within the enterprise. And we'll talk more about best practices specifically around the underlying components here in a second. Then you transition into the development phase, and this is where you're going through and you might be building out integration in different systems. You might be building your workflow processes or your forms or your reporting that you've already gathered all that detail and those requirements initially. You're now just simply implementing that stuff. And then we follow into sort of the rest of the traditional development approach with testing, deployment, and then what I think actually is probably most important, and I'm sure most folks would agree here is the knowledge transfer portion. Every organization is different, and we see lots of different organizations where the business will own a solution like what Matt would build, or maybe IT owns that particular solution, or maybe there's a hybrid approach of an intermediate type organization that is responsible for the maintenance of that. Development is owned by IT, and changes are requested by the business. There's really different models to support all that, but the key here is that there is proper documentation, there's proper project transitioning, and there's proper training at various different levels of the organization, both on the end user side, which is incredibly important, obviously, but also within the folks that are going to be maintaining and supporting and building processes going forward. BPM tools are incredibly powerful and rich tools, but like most tools, they are a tool, and this is sort of what I think Matt was talking about. You still need to have a good approach and a good wealth of experience and treat them as a tool that you can use in your toolbox. So as we start breaking down sort of the approach to building out a process, we also want to take a look at the different roles and the ownership of those roles within a project team. So who will participate in this particular project? I have members of the business, hopefully you'll have some IT sponsorship or some business sponsorship at an executive level. There's going to be infrastructure folks. There's going to be various different team members that are involved in this. And that was really, really well, I think, diagrammed in Matt's slide when he talked about the different roles that he has on his team and how each different person plays a role within the development of the solution. It's not always just Matt's team. It's not always just the business. It's not always some executive. It's really a hybrid approach and a mix of different types of folks that are involved in building out these solutions. Next, from a requirements perspective, what do we need to accomplish? And again, a lot of that is collected initially in that first envisioning phase, and then transitioning that into the really solution design and infrastructure planning phases of the rest of the project. So how are we going to go and determine if what we built is actually really what we needed? How will we measure that success of the solution? And then what do we need to go and set up underneath that to support that? There's lots of different types of approaches to really building out solutions here. And what I'll probably recommend, and I think Matt probably would echo this as well, is don't be too focused on just the process or the solution at hand, but really do take a step back and think about the entire enterprise or the entire organization. Because what I think we found, and Matt, you probably have found this as well at Wells, is that whenever building out these solutions, oftentimes not only do they touch various different portions of an enterprise organization, but it almost becomes very, very viral. And the fact that lots of different teams start to get involved and see the value and the potential of BPM platforms. And then they start to want to go and build solutions on top of that platform as well. So think about the details around that. So from an ownership perspective, we like to go, and whenever we work with our customers, we like to go and try to divvy up those roles and make sure that all those key roles and ownership points are covered, simply because it's important to make sure that everybody not only has buy-in, but everybody has accountability around that. So we understand that the business owns maybe a lot of the requirements gathering up front, and then they go through and own a lot of the testing portion if you don't have a dedicated QA team. From a development perspective, who's going to be responsible for building the UIs, who's going to be responsible for building the reports, who's going to be responsible for integration or building out the workflow processes. Again, these are the very same types of approaches that most folks probably take in projects hopefully today, regardless of their size. What you're doing with a business process application platform really isn't a lot different from a paradigm perspective than what you probably do with traditional solution development today. It's just that the experiences are going to be a little bit different, and the tool sets are going to be a little bit different. And to Matt's point, some of the practices are going to be a little bit different. But at the end of the day, you're still building out a solution that you want to deploy internally. A lot of times what our teams will do when working with our customers and partners is to go and come up with something very much like this. This is a package sheet that we have that allows folks to sit down when they're going through the definition phase and they're divvying up those roles and making sure that all the different bases are covered, from project definition to infrastructure planning to development to testing and then to knowledge transfer. And this is a good way, again, kind of as a best practice, just to sort of recommend and keep track of all the different owners and all the different participants within a solution. Sometimes it could be 3 people, 5 people, but whenever you're building extremely large-scale processes and applications, those are no doubt going to touch multiple different teams. The bigger your organization is, the more people that you're going to have to get involved. From this team owns the Active Directory infrastructure to this team owns the Oracle databases to this team owns the portal technology. You're not going to get necessarily all those teams involved at the exact same time, but it's important to know who from those different teams you need to get involved whenever you need that. So here's our kind of first best practice recommendation around here, and it's going to be documenting the needs. And we see a lot of different things that our customers will use and do it in multiple different ways. So sometimes those are going to be the swim lane diagrams that Matt mentioned, and sometimes that's really going through and managing out your data and security around that. The next, really providing a solid document around gathering requirements for that. Matt, this is probably something that you guys I think have as well in some form or fashion. This probably doesn't look too different from some of the work that you guys have done on your team. What we like to do is simply go through and, as Matt mentioned, defining things like the steps of the process, the details around that, the outcomes around that, and various different things like that. We found that this is extremely helpful whenever going through and documenting those needs. I mentioned earlier that infrastructure is incredibly important, and the reason that we say that is because you can either build out a process that sits on top of infrastructure that's as simple as this, or even more complex, like something like that. And so, really having some insight and some vision around that in the future will help you build out more scalable applications and processes that really can dive deeper into the enterprise. don't think of it just as a production environment. Make sure that you're covering all the other environments. Really understand how this platform fits into all the different systems that exist within your enterprise, and really try to put a lot of focus around the research and the expectation around the volumes and the usage of your processes. Now, I'm going to wrap up here in just a minute, but the last thing I want to leave you with today is really just some more information and some more thoughts around Centers of Excellence. And Centers of Excellence it's an initiative that happens within an organization where teams get together to go and really build out additional solutions on top of a platform like K2. And they're realizing that BPM is really a tool for building and delivering these process-driven applications, and that governance is incredibly important around that. So what would something like a COE provide as an example? Well, in this case, it would be something around platform governance. So figuring out the best practices around the platform or the reference architectures needed in there. It's providing enablement around that. And then it's also providing a repeatable project model so that you could, whenever you're going through and identifying projects or building out new solutions going forward, that a lot of those assets are already at hand. Now the COE would own the first 3 of these phases. That last project delivery phase, that's typically been where you see a transition into your development teams and things like that going forward, so that they can actually own the execution of that in the future. That's all the time that I have today. I really want to appreciate everyone on the phone. I want to appreciate and say very thanks a lot to Matt from Wells to provide some great insight into what it is that they're doing. I'm going to go and turn it back over to Paul and the team from ISA. We can open up for questions.
Hello, everyone. This is actually Elizabeth with ISA. I'm jumping in to help Matt and Jason in fielding questions. If you have any questions for the presenters, please type them out in the question panel. You can also select the raised hand icon in the attendee panel, and we will unmute you so you can ask your questions aloud. We've had a few attendees who have asked for a recording of the presentation. And to answer that, yes, we will be emailing a link to this presentation to all attendees by the end of the day tomorrow. So we'll go ahead and get started with questions. I see a question from Jordan Bronstein, who asks, what is the price of the K2 BPM tools?
Well, I tell you, I'm actually not a part of the licensing team, so probably what we'll do is we'll probably circle back around with you individually after the call, and be happy to work with you on that, understanding a little bit more about your organization and what it is you want to do.
All right, we'll follow up with Jordan afterwards. Another question from Justin Bailey, who asks, how do you handle changing requirements and solution enhancements?
Jason, you mind if I start off with that one?
No, Matt, I think that's a great place for you to start.
Okay, thank you. That's a very good question. And just like any other engagement, we do have change requests, we do have an enhancements log. But as you can probably imagine from my slide deck, we start with the process there too. It's based on what they're asking, we look at how that impacts the process, because again, we're gonna build around that process. If it's just a UI data element on a specific field, but a lot of times if you change the UI data element on one field, it may change things downstream too. So we have to make sure that we take it through wherever those changes need to occur. But it really is for us. I mean, it does go back to what is the impact on the process and the different roles that are going to be impacted, I guess, lack of a better word, sorry, by that change. Jason?
Yeah, and I'd like to echo that as well. I mean, I think it's really, really important not only to think about the processes you're changing, but also the downstream effects of those. A lot of times we see customers struggle with, how do we upgrade processes and how do we manage anything that's currently in flight? Because not only is it the process itself, but it's external data systems that it's talking to, and there's sometimes a lot of different moving parts. So we kind of echo what Matt mentioned. There's a lot of different ways to go and manage that. A lot of good design practices whenever you're building your processes to make them a little bit more atomic, a little bit easier to maintain going forward.
All right. We have a question from Joseph Harrison, who asks, do agile approaches have any role to play in the methodology?
I'd say yes. Definitely, and unfortunately from our perspective, we are not in an agile model. We'd love to be. One of our pain points with that is that a lot of times when we go in to work with a business partner, it's kind of an all or nothing. So they have some process that works today, and we can start working on that process, but they don't want part of a process. They'd rather have a process, a bad process that works end to end, that they know all the manual workarounds, than have half a process work in one tool and half a process work in the other tool. So conceptually, there are different ways to slice that up to make it work, whether it's, especially if something's completely manual today, whether you start with the initial request, so you kind of understand what the process is, but then you develop the initial UI and maybe the first step, and you kind of build on that to get all the later steps in the process where you can just always switch back to manual. But just kind of in the nature of a lot of groups we work with and the fact that they do have things in place, it's a tough sell for us, but we would love to do a lot more agile work.
And I think what we see is that a lot of times we have customers that, they try to bite off a ton and really boil the ocean in the first project. And I think a lot of times, that's not always the best approach. The best approach is to try to get some of those easy wins. And kind of like Matt was saying, if you can take a very large manual process and start automating portions of it, maybe you start with the first couple of steps where you're, even if you're moving from, physically moving documents from someone's desk to another person's desk to sending out email notifications, at least you're gaining some efficiencies that way, and really, trying to start thinking about where can you gain a ton of business value and traction initially to really provide some value for the folks that are participating in those processes. I think Agile has a huge place in approaches like this, and it really just depends on the development methodologies that you currently employ and how easy it is to put those into place where you're at.
And that's a great point that Jason makes, is that whole going in and boiling the ocean. Jason and I probably both spend a lot of time working with, for him, their customers, and for us, our business partners, to explain to them what's the reality of how this is going to work once we actually get it into a BPM engine. And even though they're sitting there saying yes, we're saying that we're using the same terminology and we think they get it and they think they get it, there's going to be some disconnects. So the more that you build before they actually know what they're getting, the more risk you have that you're going to have rework and things that just don't work right. So getting those little pieces out there, I think Jason's 100% right in that.
And we'll move on to one last question from John Flamholt, who asks, what do you do to ensure your SMEs have given you all the details? We get a lot of bugs, change requests after development because they didn't convey everything in the process.
That's a great question. I do think our process engineers are really great at what they do, and they really dig in, and it's, they never go in with a set script of what they're going to ask. They're going to go in with a starting point, and then based on what they're hearing, they're going to get stuff back. But we do run into situations where we get SMEs that may not understand, the vision, or may not understand everything that goes on in their process, and that is an issue. A lot of times when we do think that we're not getting the complete picture, we will, or not a lot of times, all the time, when we think we're working with someone who can't give us a complete picture, we will raise that up. But if it's something that we can't recognize, we will have issues as a result of that.
I think for us, it's really just, probably not a lot different than the approaches you would take for your traditional application development approaches as far as requirements gathering. Everyone's got a slightly different methodology and approach. What we find with our customers to be incredibly helpful is some of the assets that we provided as well around, documenting the requirements. I'm really understanding from at least a tool perspective, what are all the inputs and outputs that you expect from a business process. What are the data integration points? What are who are the users it's going to go to? What are the SLAs and the rules or the escalation needs behind those? And if you can have something like that Excel document that I shared with you guys that really gives you a template to start with, start asking those questions, then that'll help you over time really build up the experience and the confidence to be savvy enough to know that whenever you're talking to a customer and they start going down a particular path, that they're probably going to end up, asking for additional work in the future if you don't identify that now and try to, effectively nip that in the bud and either get that off the table as out of scope for this iteration, or really get it nailed down and figure out what the real process you need to build out is around that.
This is Paul. I wanted to ask if you guys have seen any decent templates for business cases and return on investment kinds of calculations, valuation techniques, etc., that would help folks communicate to their management the potential value add of a platform and a process such as this.
We don't have any set templates in our group. We will partner with teams to help them build their business cases to come in and work with us. I may put in a little bit on that, but I've got a peer who's our service leader, is basically the gatekeeper for all the work that any of our BPM projects do, and she does a lot of that upfront work. So we have used different templates, and you know, we've seen different things from vendors, but I don't have a set standard that we use.
Whenever we're talking to potential customers or even new customers that have questions around the ROI and the benefit of a platform like K2, we see various different types of business cases that get built out. Sometimes we'll even go and help provide a lot of additional insight and information around those. What I probably would share with you around that specifically is that with BPM platforms, rarely do they just stay focused within an individual department or group or team or even division. They're usually something that can spread out across the entire organization. So whenever you start thinking about building those business cases, again, as I mentioned earlier, from an infrastructure perspective, don't focus too much on just one department or one solution or one process. With a business case, don't focus on just the initial immediate problem at hand. You know, how do I go and automate this process? Think about, take a step back, go up 10,000 feet, and think about all the different processes that you might have, and help start factoring that into your into your calculations around, and when you start to go building your business case. You know, it's not just something as simple as I save 4 hours per worker, you know, per day, per week, per month, whatever that is, and build up the numbers that way, because you'll be focused around just one process. Really take a step back and realize all of their values and efficiencies you can gain when you start automating your processes.
Okay, well, we've now hit the top of the hour, and we'll be closing the session. Thank you, Matt, Jason, and Paul, and I'd like to thank our attendees. Thank you all for your time and your questions and your attention.
Thank you very much.
Thanks all. Thanks very much.